Today, nearly 1,200 New York Times workers have walked off the job. This comes as New York Times workers and executives have failed to reach an agreement on their new contracts. Right now, the latest offer from the New York Times to the workers is a measly 2.9% pay increase annually. For those of you who are paying attention to that sort of thing, inflation right now, 7.5%. So that would be taking essentially a pay cut when you take that into account. And you absolutely should be taking that into account because your dollar is not going to go nearly as far. So you should be asking for more money. We're going to get into the details about the unions and exactly what they're asking for, how much profit the New York Times is actually on track to make this year, which this number was pretty surprising to me. We're going to get into what Elon Musk is saying about this whole thing and why his take on unions is all going to be a bad take anyway. And then lastly, what piece of the puzzle this plays in the whole labor movement as a whole in the United States, which is growing to be more and more important, honestly, day by day at this point. Right now, workers are asking for a few things. One of them is a pay floor at $65,000 for these workers. Now, that might sound like a lot of money if you're living in a small town in rural America, but I can assure you that in New York City and the other major metropolitan areas in the US where these workers live, rent is extremely high, and honestly, shit is expensive. So this is an absolutely fair thing to be asking for. A lot of these people, just for housing, are paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month for an apartment, right? So if you're in that range, obviously asking for a floor around $65,000 a month, $65,000 a year is not a crazy ask. The other thing that workers are asking for is annual pay increases in their new contract to be at 5.5%. That seems absolutely reasonable when, again, inflation is 7.5%. That's still essentially taking a pay cut, but workers they're only asking for a little bit more. Again, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but New York Times in 2022, over $300 million in profits is what they're going to have. Over $300 million. We'll get into that in a little bit. So far, no comments from the most pro-labor president in American history. That is Union Joe Biden. This is the same pro-labor, in quotes, president who just about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, went and asked Congress to approve the deal that the rail workers were against and that the rail barons and the corporate greedy folks over at the railway companies were asking for. Labor man Joe Biden siding with the big corporations and absolutely screwing over the workers, only giving them 1 sick day per year. Seems a little crazy to me, especially, again, this is the most pro-labor president in American history. Maybe not so much. I don't know. Thanks for all the votes for Democrats in the midterms, but sorry, we're going to stab you all in the back. But I digress. Let's get back to the New York Times here. But before we get into an article here that's going to give a good overview of everything that's going on, striking workers are asking you not to read anything from the New York Times today. Avoid the New York Times website. Avoid their social media and all of this sort of stuff. One that will make a difference that you probably do. Break your Wordle streak. You probably were not going to get the word right today anyway, but Wordle is owned by the New York Times. Break that streak today, and you can get back to your Wordle games on another day. But first, let's get into this article from the Washington Post for some additional details. Headline: New York Times employees strike for 24 hours in a labor dispute. The most dramatic move by union workers at the company in decades follows months of negotiations over pay and other issues. Reporters won't write stories or interview sources, photojournalists will stay home, and if a spate of unsavory language breaks out on the online comments thread posted below a New York Times story, there might not be anyone on hand to delete it. That's the expected scenario at the Times on Thursday after more than 1,100 employees began a day-long work stoppage at midnight in one of the most dramatic labor disputes at the company in decades. Members of the New York Times Guild, the union that covers about 1,400 Times workers, including non-newsroom departments such as advertising and security, have said that the walkout is the culmination of months of frustration over contract negotiations on a range of issues, particularly compensation. The previous employee contracts expired in March 2021. In a letter to union members this week, union organizers wrote that, quote, "We cannot get a deal until the company makes wage and benefit proposals that truly share the company's gains with its employees." They accused the company on Wednesday evening of failing to bargain in good faith. We'll skip down a little bit here. The dispute comes as several media companies are laying off employees, citing a challenging economic environment. The Times, though, is widely considered one of the industry's rare success stories. Executives said in their latest earnings call that they had growth in the newsroom and a projected total adjusted operating profit of between $320 and $330 million by the end of the year. Some staffers argue that they should share more of the fruits of this recent success after enduring stagnant wages and belt tightening during leaner times for the company. Quote, "That's where it feels more than just a matter of disagreement on numbers, but really a slap in the face," said film critic A.O. Scott. "We have devoted so much of our time, energy, work, and love to this paper, which seems unwilling to recognize or to reward that contribution." Again, the big thing that sticks out right there to me, adjusted operating profit. We're talking profits, not revenues. Profits of over $300 million in 2022 alone. The union here is fighting for only 2% more than what the company is offering them. And like, sure, that money, there's a lot of places that it could go, and where it'll probably go, buybacks. Sorry about that, something in my throat. We'll talk about those in a second. But if you divided, though, that $300 million or $320 million, if you divided that up amongst the 1,400 union members here, you're going to end up with over $200,000 in profit per union member. Surely, with over $200,000 in profit per union member, you can afford to bump their salaries an additional 2 to 3% per year, especially while inflation is crippling your employees at 7.5% in 2022. Surely you can do it. I mentioned buybacks, and you know what? Unfortunately, it seems like the company is on track to do so. Not surprising. Colin, you can go ahead and pull up the tweet. "This is a sad day for the New York Times. The company pledged $150 million in stock buybacks this year, but it's offering staff what it amounts to a pay cut during record inflation in the most expensive city in the world. I love the Times, and I wish it loved me back." I mean, the tweet hits the nail on the head. It's kind of the same thing I've just been saying here, but again, companies here are focused more on their shareholders than they are their employees. This is not a trend that is unique to the New York Times. In a second, I'm going to get into a lot of other places where this sort of exact story seems to be playing out at company after company after company across the country. Not that you ask for it, but Elon Musk can't get himself out of the headlines these days. Colin, we can pull up the Fox News article. Elon Musk's take on all of this. Woke versus woke. Now, of course, any real take from Elon Musk on unions is going to be extremely one-sided, but he probably couldn't help himself but get a little bit of an attack in on the New York Times as well. Elon, of course, has helped squash many strikes in his day and unionizing efforts at his company, including Tesla. Workers there have tried to unionize in the past, but amidst union busting and all, they have been unsuccessful so far. That doesn't mean that it might not happen in the future, but that's something to look at. But in general, what the heck does all of this mean, right? There's a lot going on, and this is just another example of a giant corporation in one breath, essentially, on their corporate earnings calls that happen every quarter. And over here on those calls, they're like, well, folks, we this month we're on track to hit X billion dollars in revenue, which means we're going to have X hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. And this is an absolute record for us. We're going to be paying out X amount in dividends to our investors here. And we'll buy back X number of our stock to help boost the price for you all. And everyone's going to line their pockets with extra money. And then on the other side, they'll be negotiating with their workers. And it's like, oh man, you know, guys, like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Times are tough. Times are so hard right now. Inflation is high. the cost of our goods are so high. We're having issues with supply chains trying to get our orders into people. I don't think that 2% raise is going to happen this year. I don't think we can give you an extra $2,000 to your paycheck for the whole year. I'm so sorry. Times are tough. Things are expensive for you. They're expensive for us as well. And then again, over on the earnings call that probably are happening on the same days in a lot of cases, it's, a question from an investor. What are you projecting for next year? Well, since we've been able to keep our worker salaries down, we're going to be able to raise prices for customers and just add more to your dividend, because you as an investor are doing way more than delivering goods to our customers, actually. And then, again, back on the other side, it's just like, nope, sorry guys, like, F off. It's ridiculous, and people are clearly waking up to it with all of these labor movements, the labor movement as a whole, and all of these unionizing drives and things going on across the country. Here on Status Coup, we've covered this with all sorts of things, from the railroads to Starbucks to Amazon, all sorts of companies where this is happening across the country. Again, here, I'll go through a couple examples here. Starbucks for 2022 projected annual gross profits of $21 billion. $21 billion. And instead of giving the workers who are unionizing what they're looking for, they're trying to stop unionizing efforts everywhere. And I read something recently that Starbucks is now, to try to appease to workers, offering tipping to their customers. Now, at a lot of places, I think tipping is a good way to take care of workers. But when Starbucks has got $21 billion in gross profits, I think that instead of asking your customers to pay your employees, that maybe you should take some of those billions of dollars and maybe just, like, I don't know, pay them a couple more dollars per hour. Seems like that would make a lot of sense. I mean, if you're spending $6 on a latte, surely you can pay your workers more than what you're paying them now. But that's not what we're seeing. Railway companies, again, several of these railway companies, hundreds of millions of dollars in profit at the end of the year. Not revenue, profit. Some of them over $1 billion in profit, okay? Again, when workers ask, hey, like, they're not even really asking for more money. They just want a little bit more flexibility with their schedules so that they can maybe catch their kids' baseball game, or God forbid if they get sick, they can take a day or two off and not miss out on the wages. Instead, they're going into work sick and in some cases getting very sick and ending up in worse health issues as a result of needing to work through illness and whatnot on the railroads. We wouldn't let airline pilots go into work if they were sick or having issues. Again, rail workers are interfacing with roads and things like that. It's a very dangerous industry they're carrying chemicals, they're carrying all sorts of stuff. We need these people to be well rested and in good shape. And instead of negotiating in good faith with their workers and giving them just a handful of paid sick days, right? Total hard line from the railway companies, mostly because they knew that Joe Biden was going to bail them out and that the Democrats in Congress were going to end up forcing the deal that the corporations wanted and not the workers. Again, F the workers, but the corporations get what they want. One more example, Amazon. Amazon is not going to necessarily show profits in their earnings call because they're essentially just buying as much as they can and growing extremely quickly, also buying back a lot of their stock to make it look like they're not making money. But in reality, they had a record $127 billion in revenue. $127 billion in revenue. And when their workers who make the whole company run essentially ask for small raises and ask for reasonable amounts of time for breaks so they don't have to spend their entire break walking 15 minutes across the massive warehouse to get to the bathroom and have just enough time to get back, or being tracked through the warehouse where fires are happening and all sorts of crazy stuff. Instead of helping their workers, they squash the unionizing efforts there too. And again, Status Coup covered a lot of this stuff. One of the only outlets on the ground covering this sort of thing. In 2023, there's going to be a whole lot more of this on tap. We're going to see all sorts of additional labor strikes going on, and labor movement and unionization going on in general. We're hearing about potential auto worker strikes. We're probably going to see more with the railway workers. And if any of that sort of stuff happens, Status Coup will absolutely be there to bring it to you live on the ground myself, Jordan, Tina. We've got folks who will be on the ground at these strikes. Tina was covering out in California, the grad students striking. Jordan's covered a lot of the Amazon workers. I've been speaking to Starbucks workers. Jordan had talked to Starbucks workers before. So we'll be there to give you an independent take on what's going on. We're not corporate backed or anything like that. We are backed by the people. If you want to consider supporting that type of reporting, consider becoming a member for as low as $5 a month at statuscoup.com/join. Thank you guys so much for watching. Follow me on Twitter at LewisD217. I'd love to talk to you all there. Make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell down below to get notified for our daily live stream. I believe today is Ron and Tina on. And thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys later.